Hey guys, this is Tyler, also known as Tobakudan, and today I'll be explaining the configuration of a new HUD that I'm releasing. It's called the T-HUD, or THUD for short. First I'd like to apologize for the audio. I think there's an echo, and I wasn't able to remove it from the audio, so sorry about that, and please bear with me. Starting on the left side here, we have the auto notes and the total number of hands we've played against this opponent. At the top we have the effective stack sizes. If we click on it, we get a bunch of charts. First we have the shove fold, small blind shove. This is the mash chart that most of you are probably familiar with. And its accompanying shove fold, big blind calling chart. We also have the Sklansky-Chubukov chart. And here we have the min-raise shove game, small blind opening, big blind shoving, and small blind calling charts. These are directly taken from Will Tipton's Expert Heads Up No Limit Hold'em Volume 1. As are the next two charts. The next three are going to be used in conjunction. Here we have the exploitative shove fold small blind shoving chart. So given a big blind calling percentage and an effective stack size, it tells us the maximally exploitative shoving range. And it's given in terms of the top X% of hands. And this chart percentile is going to show us how to find that. So for example, if we take Queen 9 suited, we see that it's the top 22.9% of hands. It's in the top 22.9% of hands. And here's a similar chart, exploitative shove fold BB calling. So given a small blind jamming percentage and an effective stack size, it gives us the maximally exploitative calling range. Okay, here we have the simple pot odds chart for calling, so given a number of outs for the flop turn or the flop and turn. Here we have a flop shoving chart, so here given a number of outs and a shove to pot ratio. It tells us the fold equity needed to break even. So for example, if we have 8 outs and our shove size is 1.5 times the pot, then we need a fold equity of 19% to break even. And anything more than that is going to be profitable. And here's a similar chart for turn shoving. Okay, now before I move on to the pre-flop and post-flop stats, I just want to mention a unique feature of this HUD. I don't think it's in any other HUD I've seen before, and it's lifetime hero stats against single opponents. Now this is a difficulty with Poker Tracker 4. I think it's well known that it's not easy to do. Even if you program preflop stats like this for an opponent, you can't just click a button and have a setting where the same appears for yourself against that opponent alone. It's you can only do that. You can only have hero stats against all opponents or against this one opponent in this current tournament, not all past tournaments. So these are all uniquely programmed stats, although it looks like a mirror image of the opponent's HUD. Yeah, these are all unique and programmed specifically for the hero against a single opponent. So once you understand all the opponent stats, you also know how to interpret the hero stats because they're the same. And this is going to be very useful because basically what this gives us is, in essence, our opponent's HUD, the image that we've given off to them by our previous play. And that can change our strategy pretty significantly by knowing how our opponent perceives us. Okay, so let's move to the top left corner where we have the small blind preflop stats. First, I'll mention that the stack sizes are separated by increments of 5, starting from 0 and going to 25. And you might have noticed Actually, first let me just mention each stat. So here's the total number of hands played by the small blind. Here is steals, limps, number of 3-bets they faced, 4-bets, fold versus 3-bets, ISOs they faced, limp raise, and limp fold. Okay, so I think you might have noticed that many of the stats are separated by a slash. What this means is a little bit different depending on whether it's a raise or fold. So, for example, for steals on the left, this is not all-in raises, 43%. And on the right, 13%, it is all-in raises. So that's going to be similar for 4-bet and limp raise. And for folding stats, we have, it's similar, but on the left side, it's fold versus a not all-in raise. And on the right, it's a fold versus an all-in raise. And this is going to be similar also for the opportunities. Those are the blue columns. So 3-bet, the number of 3-bets you faced. On the left, it's number of not all-in 3-bets you faced. And on the right, it's number of all-in 3-bets you faced. And similarly for ISO raises. Now, in most HUDs I've seen, the number of opportunities is not given for each situation. It's only given, for example, for how many hands were played in the small blind. But I think there is a significant advantage to having the number of opportunities for each situation, like we do here. And here's why. Let me just give an example. Take fold versus 3-bet. Against this opponent, we have 100% at the stack size 5 to 10. And there's been one opportunity where that's happened. Now, if this one were a 5, but this number was still 100, those would be two things that mean two very different things. It's very different that they folded 1 out of 1 times, or whether they folded 5 out of 5 times. And just by looking at the 100, you wouldn't know which it is, or any other number other than 1 or 5. And so by having this, we get a more accurate picture of our opponent's frequencies. And so it's nice that we have it for each situation. And this is both for the post-flop stats as well as the other pre-flop stats. Okay, moving on to the big blinds pre-flop stats. The formatting is pretty much all the same. Stats might be a little bit different. So here, the number of steals they faced, 3-bet, fold versus, steal, number of limps they faced, ISO raise, number of 4-bets they faced, fold versus 4-bet. Here you'll see that it's not separated by a slash, although 4-bets could be not all in or all in. This is just because it was difficult to do so. The programming was difficult. And most 4-bets tend to be all in anyways in a heads up sit and go. So I don't think it'll be much of a problem. And here's a number of limp raises they faced and fold versus limp raise. Okay, that's it for the pre-flop stats. Now moving on to the post-flop stats. The blue columns, O is the number of opportunities. FTR is for flop, turn, and river. At the top row, we have AFQ, aggression frequency quotient, for the flop, turn, and river. Now the post-flop stats are based on an entirely new concept. It's a little bit involved, so I'm going to need to explain it. Traditionally, post-flop stats were based on the most commonly occurring situations. So terms we're familiar with like c-betting, donking, limp c-betting, probing, delayed c-betting, things like that. This does have its advantages, but one of its disadvantages is that it misses a lot of information. For example, a c-bet is defined as when you bet on a street when you were the aggressor on all previous streets. So on the flop, it's a c-bet if you were the aggressor on pre-flop, and on the turn, it's a c-bet when you bet if you were the aggressor pre-flop as well as on the flop, and similarly for the river. But, for example, say we're on the river and we bet, but we were not the aggressor on one of the previous streets, then that is not registered as a CBET. And often that won't be registered in any stat in the HUD, so that information is going to be missed completely. This HUD, this setup for post-flop stats, does not miss any piece of information. If an opponent takes an action, it's going to be recorded somewhere in this HUD. And this is powerful, especially for heads up set and goes, because we often don't play opponents more than once or twice. And so it's important to make adjustments quickly. And the way to do that is to use all the information that's available to us. And this HUD allows us to do so. I think it's also more intuitive because its stats are based only on the previous street and not anything prior to that. And it also, I believe, maps a fish's subconscious thought processes more accurately. That is, fish don't really think in terms of probing, c-betting, delayed c-betting, and categories like that. Rather, they basically are more focused on what happened on the previous street only. And so for exploiting fish especially, I think this configuration is going to be very powerful. Okay, so the stats themselves, let's go through them. There's three basic ones, and those are the gray rows. We have c-bet, which is defined as a bet when you were the aggressor on the previous street, a donk, which is a bet when you were, or your opponent was the aggressor on the previous street, and a limp c-bet, where neither of you was the aggressor on the previous street. That is, if it was pre-flop, it goes call check, or if it was a post-flop street, it goes check check. And then all the stats below them are related to them. So VCB is versus a c-bet, so that's when you face a c-bet. And VRCB is versus a raise c-bet, so you c-bet and you get raised. Similar, we have versus donk and versus raise donk, versus limp donk and versus raise limp c-bet. And again, you'll notice here that some of the stats are separated by a slash, but it means something different than it does pre-flop. So let's take a versus c-bet, for example. On the flop, when this opponent faced a c-bet, 17% of the time they raised, and 83% of the time they folded. So on the left side, it's just raise, and the right side, it's fold. And that's the same for all the stats here that have a slash. And for the big blind post-flop stats, everything's basically the same. The only difference is the terminology or the naming is just slightly different. Limp c-bet becomes limp donk, and then it's versus limp c-bet and versus raise limp donk. So, yep, that explains everything about this HUD. Let me know if you have any questions or suggestions for improvement. And please see the description below for my email to contact me. And I hope you enjoy using the HUD. Cheers.